Lexie Natasha tweeted and was just saying a bunch about pride and how proud she was of this team. Have you kind of had similar emotions the last couple of days, and how do you balance that with a very painful?
Neither the NBA nor the WNBA predicted it. A player who doubted every shot she made and silently feared that today would be her discharge. She struggled to secure a berth on the team during her first 2 seasons. Then, in an instant, everything changed. In addition to going through the biggest transformation in women's basketball history, Lexie Hull also turned into one of its most fascinating stories. After years of putting up with the Caitlin Clark storm, she has finally opened out about what it was like. Not the polished media version, but the real one. She revealed something that nobody really expected to hear before any of this made sense. Before Caitlin Clark enters Gainbridge Fieldhouse, you also need to understand Lexie Hull's predicament. Hull was chosen by the Indiana Fever with the 6th overall pick in the 2022 draft. On paper, it sounds like a dream. 6th place overall. Top 10 options. A Stanford alumnus won a national title, 3 All-Pac-12 awards, and the class and top 90 honors for her outstanding athletic and academic accomplishments in her last season. This was supposed to be the start. Rather, it became a struggle that most outsiders never really recognized because of the terrible illness during those early years. Not quite as good. They suffered losing seasons and missed the playoffs entirely, making them one of the league's worst teams. But Hull had to work hard to earn a spot on the team. This is not a situation that any young player wants to be in. Every single night was important. Every object has a bad connotation. She knew that she was acting fearfully. During her first 2 seasons, she averaged fewer than 5 points per game. During her second season, she performed for about 20 minutes every night. However, she was only able to obtain 6 points. The numbers are correct. Something was holding her back. Hull would later pinpoint that item exactly. Few athletes ever discuss their early years in public, but she was willing to do so. Check out what she told Glamour magazine. I occasionally feared that if I didn't shoot, I might be benched or cut. Someone with outstanding credentials, a Stanford alum, and a top 10 draft pick are all lying awake, fearing that one lost chance could ruin their futures. That's what it was like to be on a losing team with nothing to cheer you up. She said, those early years were really nerve-wracking. A losing culture, no space for error, and no playoffs. There was too much at risk to win. As a result, everything was significant. Furthermore, that kind of pressure has an impact on more than just your shot. It gets into your head. It changes how you breathe, move, and think on the court. But something happened that changed not only Lexie Hull's career but also the entire trajectory of the team and even the status of American women's basketball in general. No one outside was observing the Fever, and Hull was choking. The Indiana Fever selected Caitlin Clark 1st overall in the 2024 WNBA draft. In case you need a refresher, here is a quick summary of Caitlin Clark's persona at the time. Regardless of gender, the most decorated scorer in NCAA basketball history. A player who, by herself, obliterated decades-old records, made Big Ten women's basketball a must-watch event, and converted Iowa Hawkeyes games into sellouts and nationally televised events. The WNBA as a whole was set to put the frenzy surrounding her, which had never been witnessed for a women's basketball player, to the test. It was sincere. Her status as the most important player in the league was cemented by her debut season's record-breaking productivity and fan interaction. Suddenly, the Indiana Fever became the most talked about, controversial, and esteemed team in the WNBA. Everywhere they went, there was a media frenzy, sold-out audiences, and national broadcasts. Caitlin Clark was wearing the Indiana Fever shirt, which Lexie Hull noticed. It's rare to talk about Caitlin Clark's influence on her colleagues. There were additional factors to take into account besides visibility. Larger audiences, sponsorship agreements, and the cameras that followed them weren't the only reasons. The primary difference, according to Lexie Hull, is what happens inside the lines throughout a game. Something that is essentially invisible unless you know what you're looking for. Caitlin Clark has a different viewpoint on the floor than almost everyone who has ever played this game. She's got a great idea for the court. She has a certain depth. Coaches are also motivated by her ability to attract defenders. Open perimeter shooters have no obstacles to overcome. For someone like Lexie Hull, who had been tormenting herself over every shot attempt for 2 years. It was very liberating. Hull's depiction of the changeover takes on new significance when you take into account what came before it. After Clark arrived, she confidently said, "I know I'm going to get open shots, but I don't need to worry about whether they go in or not because I've put in the work to set myself up for this, and I'll live with the outcome." The numbers demonstrated the type of freedom that is only possible when the pressure valve is finally opened. Hull had a 47% three-point shooting percentage in 2024. 1%. It was one of the top shooting performances in the league that year and a lifetime best. Her three-point shooting percentage dropped to 36.7% as a result of those looks, exactly where it had been in college before Clark passed away. The stats tell the story even more effectively than the words. But the court wasn't the only place where things changed. The plot starts to get much more interesting at this point. This is due to the fact that the off-court relationship between Lexie Hull and Caitlin Clark caused controversy, garnered media attention, and emerged as one of the most talked-about topics in women's sports. When Clark was selected, many were somewhat concerned about how she would adapt to a locker room full of strangers. During her 4 years at Iowa, she had played with Gabby Marshall and Kate Martin, her childhood co-workers. When she arrived in Indiana, she was the brand's new face in a room where everyone else had previously established relationships. The concern was real. Would she fit in well? Would her attention irritate the current players, or would they welcome her? And in reality, this is what happened. Almost immediately, she fell in love with Lexie Hull. At the conclusion of that first season, they were hanging out off the court in Indianapolis. They were laughing, trying out various drinks, and sharing content on TikTok as if they had been friends for years. The WNBA traveled to Mexico during the Olympic break. There was no denying that fans adored the link. However, by 2025, the dynamic had developed to the point where it was known by a different name. When Sophie Cunningham moved to Indiana in the off-season prior to the 2025 season, what had been a duet became a trio. Hull, Cunningham, and Clark started calling themselves the Trace Latches. And their combined efforts resulted in some of the most humorous and well-liked stuff in the league. Hull and Cunningham were Clark's well-known caddies at an LPGA Pro-Am event. On social media, they were always making fun of one another. In one of the most humorous comments of the off-season, Hull joked to People magazine that Clark might also benefit from some sun exposure. When Clark posted photos from Fever Media Day on Instagram with the caption, "We are so back," Hull mocked his lack of sun exposure. Yes, it was the kind of teasing that only happens in friendships when both people are truly comfortable with each other. It also gave WNBA fans a close-up look at the players' personalities. The wedding, which has been planned since Hull and Pittsburgh Pirates outfielder Will Matson became engaged in April 2025, will be attended by Clark, according to Hull. The two originally met at Stanford, where Matson was a standout baseball player before being chosen in the 6th round of the 2019 MLB draft. After retiring from baseball due to a series of illnesses, he relocated to Indianapolis to be with Hull, which says a lot about the basis of her life. Hull chose to face a side of playing with Caitlin Clark in a way that most people in her situation would have disregarded or avoided, despite the fact that everything has been cordial and joyful. And it's the part of this story that deserves the most attention. One of the most challenging seasons in WNBA history was 2025. Hull described Clark's arrival as possessing a certain manner, a seriousness, a focus, and an edge that suggested she had finished adjusting and was ready to take charge. Before the season, Hull told reporters that Clark's second year was obviously different. "It's clear that she's here and ready to do business," Hull said. And that at first, read seemed flawless. Through the first 7 games of 2025, Hull was playing the best basketball of her career, scoring more than 10 points per game and leading the WNBA in three-point percentage at 55.6%. At last, the Fever seemed to be a cohesive unit. Then the injuries started. Clark's quad issue caused him to miss a number of games. Then there was an issue with the groin. Then there was another soft tissue problem. On July 15th, during a game against the Connecticut Sun, Clark sustained his 4th injury in only a few months, resulting in one of the most heartbreaking photos of the season. Clark seemed to be holding back her tears as she got off the floor, placed her forehead on the basket structure, and sat on the bench with a towel over her face after trying her hardest and seeing everything fall apart. And, as a genuine friend would do when words cannot express their feelings, Lexie Hull was seated by her. Hull later spoke candidly about Clark's leadership role at the time. "Why me?" queries. She was frustrated that her body would not cooperate even though she was working harder than anybody else in the building. It was a difficult chapter. Despite Clark missing a significant amount of the season, the Fever prevailed. They persisted all the way to the WNBA playoffs, when they overcame the eventual champion Las Vegas Aces in a pivotal Game 5 that necessitated overtime before Indiana's ultimate loss. A key component of the run was Hull's two-way perseverance, which isn't seen in a box score. Assuming control, making plays that kept games close when the team needed them, and reliably stopping the opposition's top perimeter scorer. She kept thinking about a subject that she finally decided the public should be aware about. Following the October 2025 Women of the Year feature in a beauty magazine, Lexie Hull made the decision to stop being cautious with her comments. She was one of 5 athletes featured in the magazine, along with Nalissa Collier-Jones and the Sabali sisters. This title was appropriate for a player who had quietly become one of the most respected in the league. However, the portions of that interview that went popular online have nothing to do with her engagement, wardrobe, or basketball stats. Hull made it apparent that it concentrated on the drawbacks of competing against the most famous female athlete. "Because of the media attention and the people who have supported us since Caitlin arrived, I believe there is some envy over the Fever. That alone would have been enough to make news." However, she continued. Rather than relying on speculation or outside hearsay, she asserted that the Fever have heard what other teams have to say. According to Hull, teams and players in other locker rooms have expressed their inability to allow the Fever to triumph. It's a real target. Every team does, in fact, work more when they play Indiana. And ever since Clark came, Hull has been at its center. Because of what she decided to do with it, her reaction to everything is